so much for your time, Joe. This is such an absolute pleasure to have you. Your books and your thoughts are absolutely just so inspiring. So it was just thank you so much for your time with inspirations and aspirations, as we call this program, because this is all about the people who are inspiring others with their work, and you are one of them. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So how did you chance upon this whole side of discovering the spiritual side of selling, and how did that finally, become a book? Can you lead us through your journey?
Well, I'll give you the short version, but my dad was a detective in New York City in narcotics. He passed when I was 12 years old on the job, which obviously was a jarring experience. And from that point forward, I was the oldest in the family. So it kind of changed me a lot because I became much more responsible. Obviously, you grow up quickly when you lose a parent at a young age. And I got into the business world early. I felt a lot of pressure and responsibility. And one of the first things, first job I had, I was actually delivering beer off the back of a truck when I was 18 years old. But then my first job as far as corporate wise, was sales. I got a job in sales. I was selling advertising. Really didn't know anything about it. Went to a week. They did basically a 4-day training and gave us the script and all the information. And we went out and started selling. And I just kind of followed that and did pretty well. And then from there, was moving through my career. Was not really specifically a very spiritual person. I was kind of more of a nose to the grindstone, hard worker, New Yorker, being from New York originally. And, was going through life, it really happened for me when I started to struggle. I went through a couple of bankruptcies earlier, one when I was 19 years old and then another one later. And I think I started to look at things a little differently after that because I was working really hard and doing all this stuff that I was taught, like work hard, set goals. I was always very interested in improving myself, personal development. I was reading a lot because I didn't go to college, so I always felt deficient. So I wanted to kind of make it up on my own. So I was constantly, still to this day, voracious reader, always learning, growing, going to seminars, doing all those things. And I started to say, well, I'm doing all the hard work. I'm doing all these different things. I'm having ups and downs. I've obviously gone through some other negatives and problems and bankruptcies. What am I missing? I feel like I was missing a piece of the puzzle. So that's what kind of got me into learning more about energy work and then learning about how your energy system works, which took me into the spiritual path. And I started to understand, okay, it's not just about what I'm doing. It's about how I feel, my energy, what I'm vibrating, all these things that were very foreign to me at that point. And I started to apply those principles then into my sales career and started to use them. I became a sales manager then. I started to teach them to my sales reps and started to see them get much better results. So I said, okay, I think I got something here. I just have to figure out how do I get it together to get people to understand it. So that was kind of the genesis of the whole spiritual selling and this, high energy selling that I do now.
Right. And there was one thing you had mentioned the first time we spoke, that, when salespersons like your sales team would not really get their results. So usually people would start asking questions, which is more about the tangible thing, like, why are your leads not up to the mark? Why are you not meeting people, talking, etc., doing the things that have been taught as per the books. You always ask them, how are you feeling? So there is the feeling part, which kind of has a huge impact, and has an impact in the sense it influences a lot of things around us. Tell us more about this, because still, I think even in today's era, a lot of people still struggle to understand how impactful can the internal environment be on that of the outside. So you lead us through some of those experiences with examples.
Yeah, and I still see that today. I still do a lot of training in companies, and I still see that same approach that you just described, right? What are you doing? You're not making enough phone calls, whatever it is. And I remember years ago, I was a sales manager, and one of the guys on my team was a very seasoned guy. He was a very good salesperson, and he was going through some struggles. He just, all of a sudden his sales were dropping, his numbers were dropping. And I said to myself, I was much younger and not even as experienced. And I remember saying, well, there's nothing I'm going to teach this guy. So let me ask him that question. I said, his name was Kenny. And I said, hey, Kenny, how do you feel? Like, what's up? Like, I see what's going on. And his whole expression and just the way he responded was almost like in shock. He almost got pushed back by the fact that I asked him that question. And he just started telling me he was going through some personal problems and he had some issues and certain things were going on in his life. And we just had a conversation. And we didn't talk about business at all. We didn't talk about his numbers. We didn't talk about what was going on. And I could see by the time we were done, and we were in there probably an hour, and I could see that by the time he left my office, he felt relieved, and he knew that I was supporting him. I wasn't just saying, hey, if you're not selling, you're no good. And shortly after that, he completely turned it around and started to he became the number one salesperson of the group within the next month. So it just showed me the power of the emotional part of it. And just by a person understanding that, hey, you're not just a salesperson here. You're not just a number, you're a person. I care about you. And, I want to help you get out of this funk or whatever was going on. So it was a very powerful moment for me, because it showed that it's not just about doing the job, which of course is important, but there was that other piece of the puzzle that was critical. And it's one of those things I'll never forget, because I remember that guy so well. And again, got him on track. It was one of my moments that I'm always very proud of.
So I'd like you to share some insights, because our feelings and our thoughts are very deep and it's very personal. And the fact is, not everybody can read books or understand things from other people's experiences, but it is also about how they feel inside and how they resonate with it. How do we understand, like, how are things affecting our world? How does just any common person relate to this or learn from this, about this thinking, feeling, and how it is impacting our world?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is we're very, again, we grow up, I know I certainly did, especially business people, very mentally driven. We're in our heads and we're always trying to figure out what to do and have a strategy, and again, these are not bad things. Mm-hmm. So the other part I think that really shifted it for me was I started to change the way I operated. And I always talk about emotional operating systems. And I went from thinking first to saying feeling first. So the same way I asked that question to Kenny and said, how do you feel? I started doing it to myself. I kept saying, okay, how do you feel? How do you feel? So it started getting me more into, and it sounds simple, but I will tell you, it's challenging because you're so used to being in your head that when you start saying, and I would say to people, how do you feel? And they couldn't even answer me. They said, well, I'm going to go out. I would ask people a question. So, well, how do you feel about what you're doing? Well, you know what I'm going to do? And they would start telling me their strategy. I said, I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you, how do you feel? So it was a big change for people to even go there. And they had to stop. And I, myself included, and I started to ask myself that question all day. Whatever I was doing, I wanted to be aware of how I was feeling. And it was really training myself to think about my feelings or go to my feelings first and not just go into my head all the time and try to problem solve or be in a mental state. It was much more important for me to be in that state of awareness. So as I got more into being, aware of my feelings, it changed how I operated because I no longer worked from that just, left brain mental focus. I started to expand and it started to take me into that. So the first step, although it sounds really simple, it's a challenge because you're not used to doing it. It's almost like I always say to people, it's like if I said to you, if you're right-handed, tomorrow be left-handed. And people say, I can't be left-handed, I don't know how to do it. But if you practiced it for a while, you could do it, right? It's the same idea. So the first thing is you want to elevate your awareness, and you do that by getting into your own self and say, how do I feel? How do I feel about what I'm doing? How do I feel about the people around me? How do I feel about how people are treating me? The more you do that, the more you would elevate that awareness, and then it becomes automatic. And over time for me now, I live in that space. But it did take time to get there. So I don't want people to get frustrated because it's a big transition because we're so mental. And then to get into that emotional state, it does take some work.
Right. And you did mention about this counterintuitive approach in the work that we are doing. I believe this is exactly what you're talking about, that it starts from the individual, the feeling side. So the simple question that you said, like, asking someone, how do you feel? Or just asking ourselves, how do I feel? How do we attune that, like understanding our feelings? Because someday we might be feeling good, someday we might not be really feeling up to the mark. Now, feeling good and feeling bad are pretty easy to understand. I feel happy and I feel bad, but there are most of the days people feel not really up to the mark. Like, I don't know why, but I'm just not feeling exactly great. I'm a little off. What do you suggest? Like, how do we change those feelings, or how do we work around those? Because that's a large part of our lives. Like, people do not understand their feelings, or exactly why am I feeling this, or probably not feeling as happy or comfortable around certain people that they have to continuously be around or work with. So how do you deal around with that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing we want to do is ask the question, which you just said, why do I feel happy? Why do I feel? I think people don't go there. They just say, oh, I feel good, I feel bad, I feel happy, I feel sad. They don't know why. So it's almost like saying, how do I get back to my happy place if I don't know how I got there? You don't know how to go. And then why did I get upset? What got me depressed or brought me to a negative space if I don't know why? So the question is, you have to identify the feeling of what is getting you upset or what is bringing you into that space. So when you ask yourself that question, now, again, a lot of people, this is a struggle because they don't know how to go there. It's not their fault. They didn't learn. And it's about drilling down into the core. So it's everything in energy is cause and effect. You have a cause. The cause of everything is going to be emotional. So I have an emotional feeling. Now, if you have a negative feeling, it's not bad. And this is important to understand. There is no good or bad. In the world of energy, there is no good or bad. It's all what it is. So what you want to do is say, if I have a negative feeling, that is your soul's way of communicating with you to say, hey, Joe, if you have a negative feeling, there's something that you have to resolve within yourself. And that is the way, instead of saying, oh, I want to get out of this mood, I want to get out of this bad mood. Now, what people will do, because they don't know what to do, is they will go into something in the physical world. They'll go shopping, they'll have a drink, they'll go eat something. So what they're doing is now they're masking the feeling that's causing them to be upset. By masking that feeling, they're not resolving it, and then it becomes a cycle. And then that's what we see people get caught in negative cycles of behavior, which is really, you're getting caught in a negative cycle of energy. The key is addressing the why. Why am I upset? What is it that's happening? Don't make it a bad thing. It's not to judge it. It's just to say, I'm upset because so-and-so treated me in a certain manner. I've had this a lot with people, and they'll say, well, I'm saying, what are you upset about? Well, I really hate the way my manager spoke to me. And I would say, okay, so where does that come from? And what'll happen is, at a higher level, you'll be able to associate that to something from when you were younger. So you'll say, oh, okay, that person is speaking to me the way my father spoke to me, the way my mother spoke to me. That always made me feel inferior or no good or not good enough. And now what your soul is doing is it's saying, hey, Joe, I want you to clear this energy. You haven't done it. So I'm going to bring somebody else into your life. Actually, you're bringing them in to bring that feeling into your awareness and say, wow, that reminded me. And then as I started doing the work, I was like, oh my God, that's exactly the way I felt around my mother or my father or somebody else. And I realized that feeling was not cleared. So therefore it was coming into me in different ways so I could deal with it.
Well, this was very commonly noticed that people would say, why do these kind of people, or why do these kind of situations always happen to me? That was one of the very common things, whether it was with people, whether it was with situations, or whether it was with circumstances or whatever. So they would encounter the same things over and over again. So is this natural for anyone, whatsoever profession, that they would get the same things happening to them unless and until, like you mentioned, address it? moving back to the term sales, like anyone who's probably trying to get certain business results, and probably they are serial entrepreneurs, and they are probably seeing the similar results happening to them. What is it that you think is, and this is they manifesting that into their lives because they have to address it? What is that addressing? With some examples, can you tell us, like, how do we address these things?
Well, the first thing is you have to want to address it. A lot of people, as you're describing it, I'm saying, oh, okay, this is the victim energy that a lot of people have. Oh, look what's happening to me. Oh, I can't get a break. Nothing goes my way. So a lot of people, it's easy to stay in victim energy because we're conditioned to do that. And depending on how you, especially if you grew up like many people did in a victim energy household. So the first thing is you have to have a desire to deal with it, which you have to. If you don't, you'll never get out of it, and that's important. And people I've worked with, I'm like, all right, do you want to get out of this? And and I'm saying, and then the second thing to me is, are you willing to do the work to get out of it? You have to be willing to do. It's like anything, right? I want to get in good shape. I have to be willing to modify my diet and go to the gym or whatever I have to do. So if there's no willingness, there's no going forward. So assuming you have those two, I don't want to be a victim anymore. Yes, I do. I am willing to do what it is. The next thing we want to do is drill down to the feeling. So the idea is, what is it that I'm actually feeling? So I'll give it to you the way I put it in the Spiritual Selling book and also my Karma Buster book, which was the understanding the feelings and the levels of the emotions, so to speak. So the first thing that happens for us is when something happens, we have a visceral, or what I call a surface emotion. I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm happy, whatever. That first thing that kind of hits us, right? But we have to learn to go underneath to get to the true emotion. So let's say your boss makes a comment that is an undermining negative comment. Your first reaction could be many things. Could be you're upset, could be you think the guy's an idiot, could be whatever it is. That's your first vibe, right, that you get. Now I've got to go down and say, okay, how did that make me feel? I need to identify that. So the question is, what did it make me feel? And it's funny, I've worked with people on this, and I would say to them, and they would say, well, my boss is a real idiot. I said, that's not the question. How did it make you feel? Well, it was upsetting, but really he was wrong. I said, that's not the question. So you have to keep going and saying, how did it make you feel? And finally, you'll get to that feeling and say, well, I felt like I was unworthy. I felt like I was incompetent. I felt like I was not important. That's really what you're feeling. So then, in order to clear this energy, and I go through meditations in the programs and the books that I have to take people through how to do it. I learned how to do it through meditation, but you can even do it just by being aware and saying, wow, I want to accept that at that moment, I really felt unworthy, and allow yourself to feel that feeling. Because what's happening is, by not feeling the emotion, you bottle it up. And then, as you said earlier, we keep recreating because the energy is still with us. So what I want to do is allow myself to feel the pain. I know it sounds counterintuitive because people say, why would I want to feel the pain? I said, well, you want to feel the pain so you could get rid of it. And by not feeling the pain, you're just holding on to it. So as you feel that pain, you will feel it, and it'll be an emotional experience, and you will cry in some cases, or just kind of feel this extreme emotional overlay where you just be like, wow, I really felt that feeling. And in many cases, what happens, what I've seen with people, is it'll bring them back to a childhood moment where they'll say, I remember an incident where my father spoke to me like that, and I was so devastated. And they'll start crying because that is the feeling, that's kind of the anchor of that feeling that they never dealt with. So that's the process by which we remove the negative energy. But until I'm willing to go there, which is why I say willingness, to go into that pain. And like I said, as humans, we're designed to avoid pain. So this is kind of a counterintuitive thing for us. It's saying, no, I'm going to go into the pain. And it's a different way of operating. So again, it's a change that we make, because normally what I say to people is, when you get upset or when you get distressed, what do you normally do? And they'll say some things. I've had people say, I clean my house. I've had people say, I go for a walk. I go have a couple of drinks. I eat a box of cookies, whatever it is that you're doing. So it's like, I have to stop that behavior and then say, I'm going to go into how I feel so that I can drill down and deal with this and get rid of it. So I hope that was clear, but it's a little more, it's a process, but you have to get used to doing it.
Yes, that was very beautifully explained, because a lot of times I myself must have been guilty of doing that. It's because we always do that. Humans are designed, where we face a problem, and it is probably our optimistic mind that will tell us, okay, that problem, like, you do not need to accept it, or you need not deal with it. And what happens is that we do not probably consciously understand, but we are bottling things up. And that definitely has an impact in some way or the other. It will probably come up as a pain in the body, or it will come up as some ailment or something, because it just has to find a way out, or it might just start having effect as on the results we have on our work. So somewhere, but that was really very beautifully explained, like you said, because, it's not about covering things up, because I think a lot of wrong habits and behaviors generally, as we see in society, drinking problems, making bad friends, or getting into bad habits, I think that comes from the same thing that you just mentioned. Like, you do not address the root of the problem, but people tend to just cover it up by probably going on a shopping spree or eating a whole box of cookies or one big chocolate cake, and then the next problem is that I am overweight, and then I have my other things. So it's like cumulative. It's just becoming another huge problem, and the real root is now so deep and so unseen, unknown, that people don't even realize that it was something which was like, it was like a seed. It was just like weeds, rather, which caused this whole big thing, which is now chaotic. And then people are like, okay, I cannot deal with my life. So I think that thing which you just mentioned a while back, where instead of covering the problem or instead of ignoring it, it's like address it head on, because that's just the way to deal away with that energy. So thank you for that beautiful explanation. That was amazing. I'm very intrigued to ask you about a mention that you had in your book about the chakras, like the energy centers, because you mentioned about energies and how we deal with these energies, and you did mention about the chakras. Can you help us understand about these energy centers and how they impact the overall everything about the human being and our experiences?
Yeah, so chakras are, it's an ancient Sanskrit word. It means wheel. And we have chakra or energy points in our body that run from the base of your spine to the crown of your head. And the way it works, I'll just give you the quick overview, is you start developing your chakras, which are your energy centers and emotional centers, the minute you are conceived. So really that early period of time, the base, it starts from the bottom up. So the base chakra, root chakra, starts to develop when you're conceived. So those 9 months, whatever, you're already developing. I always say to people, it's interesting. I'll say, well, what do you think was going on in your house? Because you have to remember, your soul remembers that. You remember everything, even though you don't remember it. You don't remember being in utero, but you do on a different level. And I'll say, like, how were your parents? Did they get along? What was going on then? So it gives us a little insight into the condition of the mother based on what was going on, and you absorb all that energy. And then as you grow up, all the other chakras start to develop up to the crown, and you hold energy there. So that's why a lot of times when we feel something, we will feel it in a space. You'll feel it in your throat where you have a chakra. You'll feel it in your chest. You'll feel it in your abdominal area. You'll feel it in your back, in your lower back, or in those two chakras that are down there. So what ends up happening is that energy sits there and your chakras spin. So that's where wheel comes from. So if your energy is not aligned, as we like to say, then it's like, I think of it as gears, right? The gears are all working together. And if the gears, even if some of those gears are not spinning correctly, they're going to impact the other gears. One of the things you said earlier, which was on point, is it could also create, for a lot of people, physical illness. Physical illness is a response to unresolved emotion. So whenever somebody gets sick, And what we've gotten to a situation here is we're so dependent on drugs now because we don't want to deal with anything. Everybody just wants to take drugs, take pills, take shots, do this. And instead of saying, well, I created the illness with my own energy. Now, again, this is taking you out of victim mode, right? Taking you into, this work to me has been about empowerment. You have the power, you're creating your life. The minute you don't think you are, you're done. You're not going to go, because you're going to give away your power. And I don't mean power in the egoic sense. I mean power within yourself, empowered within yourself. So when you know, hey, I created, I'll never forget, I was doing an event. It was a young woman there. She was starting out, she was going through a lot of problems. And we talked afterwards for a while. And I said, you are so powerful. I said, the other side of your life when you come out of this is going to be amazing. And she looked at me and she said, Joe, I created such a mess. I said, well, think of it this way. You're powerful enough to create that mess. That means you're powerful enough to create the total opposite of that mess. And she kind of, her eyes lit up and she went on to be very successful later in life. But it was just one of those moments where you saw that recognition and not realizing, wow, I created this. This was part of my journey. And again, these are not things to harp on or be mad about. These are things to say, this, I went through, losing my dad, bankruptcies, all other issues. This was part of my journey to get here. I would never be here teaching without those problems, pain, suffering, bankruptcies. These are things that make us who we are and give us depth. So you want to embrace all of that and say, okay, and part of it, karmically, studying karma for so long, certain things in your life, I don't care what you do, they're going to happen because that's part of your journey. Certain things you could avoid, but most things are going to happen anyway. It's just how do we deal with them? As we elevate, the key is issue comes up and listen, I don't care who you are, as long as you're here in the physical world, things are going to happen. Deal with it as fast as you can and move on. It doesn't mean I'm never going to have another problem. It's not, I think as humans, we get into this, people would say to me, how do I know when I'm finished? I say, never finish. There is no diploma that says I'm done. My life is perfect. I know exactly everything I'm doing. It doesn't work that way here. We're always evolving and always learning more. It just becomes easier to move through the problems or issues or whatever you want to call them. There really aren't problems. We perceive it that way. But whatever comes up, the idea is if I address the emotion quickly, I can move through it quickly. If I don't, I'll drag it for a long time.
Very true. And is that also true, Joe, that, when it's very correct that, whatever problems that comes to our life, it's basically trying to push us out of that comfort zone so that we can evolve and grow. That's there. And is it also true that when we are able to solve that set of problem or that address that problem, that stops repeating? There could be new versions of things that happen to us, but that particular thing stops repeating because we have already addressed that and we already know how to address that. Is that really how it happens? Is it true?
Yeah, so basically that is a good way to describe it. So what happens is once you deal with those emotions, and there are going to be many because there are levels within the emotion, right? Unworthiness, there are going to be levels to go through. So, but the other thing that I've learned because of how we are humans and we do hold on to things that are still scarred, it's almost like a scar, I still have it, is you get past it, and generally what'll happen is you won't see it happen. You won't be creating that anymore. You won't be creating that negative boss, or you won't be creating a financial struggle, or you won't be creating health problems because you've moved past that energy. I've seen it with a lot of people. A woman who I worked with, and she was divorced, and she was probably in her mid to late 40s. She was dating again, and she was explaining to me she was having trouble, and every guy she meets is a jerk, one of those. So I said, well, what do you want? What kind of person do you want? And we sat down and we started talking about it, and we went through the process. I'd like to have someone who's more reliable and more respectful and whatever. And she went through this list of things. And I said, all right, let's focus on that. Let's let go of that energy of creating those people. And she brought a guy in, and she had a date with a guy who was a nice guy. So I'll never forget, because she said, I said, well, how did it go? How was it? She goes, he was a really nice guy, but he was very boring. So I was laughing. I was almost like, she missed the excitement. I said, well, you're used to dating these maniacs. I said, so this kind of guy, now maybe this wasn't the perfect guy for her, but it was a better kind of person, right? So it was almost like said, okay, well, you're going in the right direction. She eventually met somebody. But I said, this is what we're looking for. And again, when you're used to doing something, she was used to all the drama of these men that mistreated her. So it's almost like uncomfortable to have somebody treat you properly. And I know that sounds crazy, but you're so used to being treated a certain way. When somebody treats you with respect or somebody appreciates you, it's very difficult. When I met my wife, it happened to me. And, my wife and I have been together over 30 years. And, it was like, when I first met her, I didn't know what to do with this person who was so kind and loving and nice, because I was used to the opposite from what I had experienced and the way I grew up and how I felt about myself. So there's that part of it in the beginning when it starts happening. It's almost like you kind of like say, wait a minute, is this really happening? Is it what's going on? Or why does this feel so uncomfortable? And it's uncomfortable because you're used to the other side. But eventually you get to the other side and you're like, oh my God, how did I ever do that? How did I ever go out with that person? Or how did I ever have that boss? Or how did I ever stay in that job? But again, all part of the process.
I wanted to understand your thoughts around this. Like, what we attract is not what we logically want, but what we are, who we are, because that's the feelings or the emotions or frequency attracting more of those frequencies. It's not just for relationships, but it is also for people who are in professions, like, in sales. Like, you do not want certain kind of clients. You do not want certain kind of business troubles, but they tend to attract more of that. What is that frequency thing that you would like to, express with your experience? Like, what is it that those are common mistakes or common things that people do, but why does that happen?
Well, I think, basically we get caught in, again, those cycles, and what we don't realize is unconsciously we have all these feelings and all this energy that we're not aware of. So that's why when people say, I always use weight loss because it's a great thing to look at. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And every year here in the US, the obesity rate is going up. So it makes no sense, right? You say, well, you're spending all this money, you're doing all this stuff. There's a commercial every 5 minutes. Everybody's talking about being healthier and everybody's getting unhealthy. So what is happening, right? There's a disconnect in this, and people are spending money and people are going to, joining all these programs. So the bottom line is, this was a woman, I'll never forget this one, and she was overweight. She was probably about 30, 40 pounds overweight. She had come to a class I did in New York years ago. And she said, I'm trying to lose weight. I'm trying to get in shape. And she said, can you help me? I said, well, yeah. I said, I'll help you. And she said, well, you're going to give me a diet? Are you going to tell me what to do? I said, I'm not a physical trainer. I'm not a personal trainer. I'm not a dietitian. I said, but I'm going to change the way you feel about yourself. And she said, well, what does that have to do with it? I said, it has everything to do with it. So we started to work on her energy and her own self-image and how she felt. And as we did it, all of a sudden she started to shift. Now, what happens is, as you shift your energy, you shift your desire. Mm-hmm. So her desires started to change. So now all of a sudden she said, you know what? I noticed that I stopped wanting to eat certain foods. She was a big fast food person and so forth. She said, I started eating, she said, but I don't know what happened. I just didn't want it, right? And she said, at night now, instead of sitting on the couch, I'm going for walks. And she started losing weight. So it was almost like, oh, I didn't realize that until I emotionally got aligned with the feeling of feeling better about myself, right? As you feel better about yourself, you're not going to desire to hurt yourself or bring pain to yourself. So this is what ends up happening is people, they're so conditioned to be in pain. And this is really, kind of the work that I really want to do with people is get them out of pain. There's a part of us that has this suffering built in and being in pain built in. And we have to evolve out of it. We have to work to get there. So the idea is to say, as I love myself more, right? That is really where you want to go. As you love yourself more and deal with these emotional issues that we've been discussing, your desire to be in pain starts to dissolve. And as your desire to be, whatever pain it is, right? Relationship pain, physical pain, overweight, money, whatever, you start to get out of that feeling. I don't want, my desire is not to do that. And you automatically change vibration. Now, energy vibration is unconscious. It's not, you don't get, it's exactly what you said, right? People didn't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I hope I gained 10 pounds this week, but they did, right? They didn't mentally do it, but they did in their energy. They're like, well, you know, that's who I am, right? I just keep getting heavier. So as we elevate and as we become aware and as we remove this negative energy, your frequency starts to shift. And all of a sudden, it's like when people stop drinking and you know, something happens and their desire to do that and self-destruct is not there anymore. Or when they get past drugs, the people who do. And which is why it's such a struggle, because people have been conditioned to be in pain. And to a degree, life is difficult, right? We have to accept that. Yeah. Human life is there's issues, but that's why we're here. And the more we elevate ourselves and the more we love ourselves, the less we'll want to cause pain for ourselves. And then you'll start to create a different vibration, and then you'll start attracting different things. But also, I think one of the things people don't talk about enough is you're also going to be desiring different things. People talk a lot about attraction, but your desire to do something, your desire to see a certain person, your desire to eat a certain food or whatever it is, or your desire to be drinking starts to go away. And that's that internal shift. That's kind of the magic of what happens inside of us. How can I live in peace in a world that is so upside down to a degree? It's a crazy world. How do I live in peace here? And we all have our moments, right? But basically, the first phase for me is I have to accept that the world is what it is, right? This is the way it's supposed to be, and we're here to have this experience. So the acceptance is a very big part of it. So if there's traffic, hey, there's traffic, I accept it. There's nothing I can do about it. I could get upset, but why? Now, what people do, for example, that's a good example, right, of being in traffic. Because people don't know what to do with their energy, they use those situations to vent that out because they're upset about something else. But I'm in traffic, so it's a good experience. It's a good excuse for me to be upset. But what they really did was they didn't do anything. They just acted out. So they didn't do that. It's like anything where people act out instead of saying, well, what's to be upset? If I'm sitting in traffic, there's nothing I can do, right? It's like, you know, I was going to New York. I was telling you, our plane got canceled. There was a snowstorm. All right, we had to go the next day. I could be upset about it, but that's what happened. So acceptance is important. The second part of it that's very, very big in the real shift up, and this is the tricky one and a difficult one for many, is really letting go of your judgment. Your judgment creates all your pain. So you've got, to me, there are three big ones. It's going to be acceptance, it's going to be judgment, and then the last one, which I think really frees you, is removing expectation. So when you remove, because this is the thing that causes us a lot of trouble, because we have certain expectations on people or whatever, and when they don't do what we want or when it doesn't work out the way we want, then we're going to judge them, criticize them, and lower our energy. But those are my three: the acceptance, the removal of judgment, and then the removal of expectation. If you don't have expectation, your whole life changes because you just do what you do, and then you let it go where it goes. And it's one, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't have goals or whatever, but the bottom line is when I do something because I want to do it, and I do something from a state of love, and I do something from a state of joy, I'm just doing it, and I'm not worried about all the other stuff. So it's a transition to get to that place, but that's where you will get much more peaceful.
How does that also apply in our professional world, especially when, let's example, for in professions which is sales oriented or which is customer oriented, expectation is very intrinsic there, that when we say letting go of judgment, because there is also these times that we have to work with competition. There are 10 other companies doing the same thing. How does one in that kind of a situation do these things like you just mentioned, where we accept the situation as it is, we let go of judgment, and we also let go of expectations, but we just focus on our energy being channelized in the right way. And that has its seeds in the feelings, the emotions that you talk about. How does that apply in the professional world? Because what we see right now, like whatever is happening at this point of time, there were tech layoffs, and then there is a bank thing that crashed, and it's affecting market and economy. It is natural that people will get affected. How do you advise people to work around these? Because these are situations, but how we deal with it has a lot to do with what we experience and what we attract into our lives. What do you want to say about this?
Yeah, I think, obviously what's going on is part of a bigger picture with the banks that just happened. There's a lot of energetic shifts. I think our current system doesn't work. That's part of the deconstruction of what's coming. That's a whole nother conversation, because that's going to be a big energetic spiritual shift that's taking place. It has been taking place, but now it's starting to come to light in the third dimension, in the physical world. So we're going to see more of this as far as banks and things like this, and restructuring of the government, and restructuring of the world really in general. But from a sales perspective, I think when I shifted out of the feeling of pressure, and it made me different. So when I go into a call, when I was talking to going to a potential prospect, my feeling was, okay, there's no judgment. I'm just accepting what's happening. I have no expectation. I focused on what my job was. To me, I'm here to serve you. I'm here to help you. So I went in with the feeling of, I'm here to help you the best way possible. What can I do to help your business? Me going in as working with sales teams and things like that. And I didn't go in with the feeling of, I have to get this much money, or I have to do this. I just was like, I want to help you. I'm going to have that conversation. Now, I prepared, I knew what I was doing. I knew how to ask the questions I wanted to ask. I knew how to connect with the person. I did do that process because there were certain questions and things that I wanted to know from a business perspective that I needed to understand. And then I would be able to say, well, here's the solution I have for you. And that was it. It was like, okay, my feeling was, if I'm meant to work with you, we are going to work together. And if I'm not meant to work with you, we're not going to work together. And that was just kind of how it relieved. See, what happens is when a salesperson especially goes in there with that feeling of, I have to close this deal, I feel that, the prospect can feel it. When you come in very loose and relaxed, I'm like, hey, I'm going to give you, this is what I do, and this is how I can help you. I remove that feeling of, and that feeling of tension. Now the prospect feels that. They feel like, wow, person's not, they're confident, they're relaxed, they seem like they know what they're doing, they want to help me. They naturally want to work with you because you're not coming in like, I'm trying to sell you something. You're not coming in with a hard sell. You're not coming in with the pressure of, I have to sell it. So the feeling of the meeting is very different. And I've had people, that I've walked out of and not done a deal, and all of a sudden they'll call me back 6 months later and they'll say, okay, we're ready to work with you. Now, I just say, well, okay, that was not the right time for us to work together, right? I accept that. Oh, okay, the timing for us was good to meet then, but not to work together at that point. Yeah. So that's kind of the way I approach it. I think when you are more relaxed, you get your energy flows, and we know that when your energy flows, good things happen, and you're not pressing and you're not stressing. So that's kind of the way I like to approach it, going in without those feelings of tension and pressure and fear. Yeah. It's a much different conversation, and I've had much better results.
Yeah, that's very enlightening, because I think the biggest mistake I think everyone makes would be to go with that kind of desperation. It's like, I have a month-end closure coming up. What are the quick tricks and tips? Like, how can we not work out of desperation or pressure of performance? It could be anything. Like, it could be going out to speak in front of 100 people. Yeah. It could be anything at all. It could be going out for the examination. I think best of students, as we have seen, they know their stuff, but just when it comes at the time of performing, they are not just in their best of state. So what is that trouble? Is it pressure of performance and desperation that rattles out our performance, or is it something more?
Well, I think there's a combination. I think a lot of people, that's how they're taught, right? So they're taught to say, well, do this and say there's a deadline. And this is all the tricks. Listen, I've been in sales a long time. I learned every one of these in trainings. Here's how you close them. Here's what you do. Get them into a corner. They used to say all this kind of stuff. Get them over here. Get them to say this. Get them to say that. So this was all, a lot of what you experience, and I do too, is just training. This is what they're taught to do, right? So that's one thing. The pressure part of it is, one of the things I look at is to say, if I choose to be in the business world, pressure is part of it. there is pressure to be in business. That's part of there is stress. There are things that come with being in business. Accept it. That's part of the game, right? Part of the game is that there is pressure. I don't want to make believe there isn't pressure. I don't want to make believe I'm not a little nervous. There were times when I was speaking, especially earlier, not really now, but I felt nervous. It was okay. I'm allowed to see, it's accepting how you feel. Hey, I'm a little nervous about this. Let me just accept that so I can allow it to pass through me instead of saying, no, I'm not nervous. Well, I can tell if you're nervous, just let it go. Accept the fact that you're nervous. So the idea, I don't have a problem with pressure. I think pressure is part of what we choose to do. If we choose a career that is not hey, I'm going to go to the office every day, shuffle papers and, work for the government or whatever, and not to disparage those people, that's fine for them. But entrepreneurs or people like us, we want to get into the arena and we want to deal. So there will be some pressure. I embrace it as part of the game. It's part of what we're here to do. Pressure is part of it. I don't feel pressure in the sense of, I feel pressure in the sense of, I want to be my best. That's probably the pressure I feel. I want to make sure every time I do something, I'm doing it at my highest level and I'm doing the best job that I can do. So that's kind of the pressure I feel now, more so than anything else. But also, like I said, going in there with the understanding that everything, your job is to do your best, do everything that you could do at the highest level. And that's all you can do, right? Everything else will take care of itself. And to me, that removes that feeling of, I have to, that's what the whole, I have to get this deal. It has to be by the end of the month. I would laugh at these guys because I would say, well, we got this deal coming in. The guy's going to be out of town. It's the end of the month. He's going to do it the first week of the next month. And people would go crazy. Oh my God, he's not going to. I'm like, what's the difference if it's, March 28th or April 3rd? Who the money still came into like, why is that? But they get they're so trained and conditioned. Oh, the monthly number, we had to hit the number. So it's just like, I've gone into companies and say, forget the numbers. Take the numbers out of your mind for now because your sales system and process is so broken. That's the least of your troubles. The numbers will come. And I've also seen this with great coaches in sports where they don't worry about the record. They don't worry about they say, okay, I got to get the team in shape. The wins will come. So I think that's really an important thing for us. And a lot of this, I have to tell you the truth of it to me, is just conditioning of the old methodology of how we learned it, and which doesn't work anymore. And let me tell you, as we keep evolving, it's going to work less and less because people now are going to look for people who they feel connected with. That's our next wave. So if you're not in that space, you're going to struggle.
This is not new knowledge. It has been very, very, very age old. It's just that we rediscovered. Why is it not being taught in schools, like from a young age? Like you are intrinsically built up to think this, because that I think can help the entire society, help the whole community, help an entire nation, the way people are brought up. Because I think it's always, the focus is always on the tangible things which is present in the physical world. I mean, you see it and hence you believe it. If you do not see it, you don't tend to believe it or value it. And it's just something which people realize now. I mean, not everyone, but those who are following more of this, they realize that it doesn't matter which profession you could be in. It doesn't matter what kind of backgrounds you're from. It's more to do with, like you mentioned, like, how are we feeling? How are we addressing it? And are we accepting it? Are we willing to learn from it and address it? And basically, it's going head on into certain things and then evolve and empower ourselves. What everyday advice would you like to give people when it comes to, like, no matter what kind of professions or backgrounds they are in, but how can we be the better versions of us, like on an everyday basis, if we can just practice some of these?
I think the main thing for me is just, focusing on how do you want to feel every day. You want to feel a certain way when you're doing your thing, whatever your thing is. And the more you focus there, the more you'll create that environment, because you want to create energy and an environment that is going to be supported and is going to be, you want to be appreciated and supported, or however it's really about the feeling, right? So the more you stay there and say, I want to help people, and help people in any way I can, because we're here to serve, because we want to serve. And when we serve, and then once we're serving people, then it's almost like looking for the balance between I want to help and I also want to receive the energy on the other side, to keep that balance there. And I think that's an important thing to do. And if you focus on, this is the way I want to feel every day when I get up, and I want to feel excited, and I want to feel like I'm helping, and I want to feel the other side as well. I want to feel the positivity coming towards me. Then you will create that. And that is where, instead of worrying about, like you said, on the, how much money or new car, how many deals, the more you stay in that space, the higher your energy will go. And then it's going to make it easier for you to manifest that and create it. So I think that's really the key going forward. The more you're aware and the more you are looking to be aware, the more good things will happen. And I think a lot of people don't want to be aware. They want to plunge their head down and say, this is what we do. We need to make 500 phone calls and blah, blah. And I just actually had an encounter like that with a person that I didn't work with because we were not aligned. And it was just kind of like, that's not your problem. And so the idea is, I think the more we are aware, and also aware of saying, choose what works for you. I think that's also an important thing. I think a lot of us take stuff on just because it comes in or whatever. I think it's be aware and choose situations that work for you, because then that's telling the universe, this is what I want, and then you're going to get more of that. If you approach every day like that, you're building that momentum, and because energy works on a momentum cycle, I'm building positive momentum, and just keep building that momentum.
It was really beautiful and insightful, simple yet significant, because I think the best things in life are so simple and so free that we do not realize that life can actually be that beautiful and actually be that simple.
So be aware of how you feel, take breaks, be nice to yourself. The nicer you are to yourself, the nicer the universe will be to you.